The fog that November morning was not the cheerful, democratic fog of Dickens, which embraces rich and poor alike in its grey anonymity. This was a more selective mist, one that seemed to gather with particular malevolence around the elegant squares of Belgravia, as though it possessed a keen sense of where scandal might best be concealed. I had risen early, a habit formed during my military years and never quite abandoned, and was taking my customary constitutional through the quiet streets when the newsboy's cry pierced the morning stillness with unusual urgency. Read all about it. Mystery death in Eaton Square. Gentleman found sitting up dead. The phrase struck me as oddly constructed, but I purchased a paper nonetheless, more from habit than genuine interest. It was not until I had returned to my modest flat and settled with my morning coffee that the true significance of the headline became apparent. Distinguished banker found dead in peculiar circumstances. Sir Montague Fairfax. Discovered in library. Body defies natural position. The article that followed was written with the breathless sensationalism that the morning papers reserve for deaths among the wealthy. But beneath the hyperbole lay details that would have set any reasonable person's mind racing. Sir Montague Fairfax, the distinguished private banker whose clients included several members of the royal family, was discovered dead in the library of his Eaton Square residence yesterday evening at approximately 9 o'clock. The discovery was made by his secretary, Miss Dorothy Crane, who had called to deliver urgent correspondence. The singular aspect of the discovery lies not merely in the fact of Sir Montague's death, but in the extraordinary position in which the body was found. According to Miss Crane's statement to police, Sir Montague was seated in perfect uprightness in his leather reading chair, his hands positioned symmetrically upon the armrests, his eyes open and directed toward the fireplace. A book lay open in his lap, and his reading spectacles remained perched upon his nose. Dr. Pembroke Ashford, the family physician, who was summoned immediately, expressed puzzlement at the body's rigid positioning. "In my 30 years of practice," Dr. Ashford stated, "I've never encountered a case where rigor mortis has set in with such perfect symmetry. The deceased appears to have been arranged with almost mathematical precision." Adding to the mystery is the testimony of Sir Montague's butler, Wickham, who maintains that when he last saw his employer at 7:30 the previous evening, Sir Montague was slumped in his chair in what the butler described as his usual reading posture. Head tilted to one side, legs crossed, one arm dangling. Wickham insists that no living person could maintain the rigid, upright position in which the body was discovered. Inspector Bradshaw of Scotland Yard, who is investigating the matter, declined to comment on whether foul play is suspected, stating only that certain irregularities require further examination. I set down my coffee cup with rather more force than necessary, causing a small splash to stain the morning tablecloth, a detail that would have horrified my fastidious friend Hercule Poirot. The thought of Poirot brought an immediate smile to my lips, for here was precisely the sort of puzzle that would set his remarkable mind working with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Within 20 minutes, I had made my way to Poirot's immaculate flat, where I found him engaged in his morning ritual of arranging his already perfect moustache before a hand mirror of extraordinary clarity. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he murmured without turning from the glass. "You arrive with the punctuality of Big Ben, and, if I am not mistaken, with news that has set your excellent heart racing. I can hear it in your footsteps. They have the irregular rhythm of excitement poorly suppressed." "How the devil do you know that?" I demanded, though I should have been accustomed by now to his uncanny perceptions. "Elementary, my friend. You rise each morning at 7:15 precisely. Your constitutional takes exactly 43 minutes. You purchase your newspaper at Pemberton's corner shop, which adds 3 minutes to your journey. Yet today, you arrive at my door 17 minutes earlier than usual, and I can hear the rustle of newsprint in your coat pocket. Ergo, something in this morning's journal has compelled you to abbreviate your routine and seek my opinion with unusual haste." He turned from the mirror with that satisfied smile that indicated his little grey cells were already beginning their work. "Come, show me this news that has so disturbed your morning tranquility." I handed him the paper, watching as his green eyes moved across the text with the methodical precision of a scholar examining an ancient manuscript. Twice he made that small sound, tiens, that indicated particular interest, and once he raised his eyebrows in that expression of delighted surprise that meant he had encountered something genuinely intriguing. "Most fascinating," he murmured, folding the paper with characteristic neatness. "A dead man who sits at attention like a soldier on parade. A butler who swears the body has moved of its own accord. A doctor who speaks of mathematical precision in the arrangement of death. It has, you must admit, a certain theatrical quality that appeals to the imagination." "You think it's murder, then?" Poirot's head tilted to one side like an inquisitive bird. "I think, mon ami, that dead men do not rearrange themselves for the convenience of their discoverers. Someone has taken considerable trouble to present Sir Montague Fairfax in a particular manner. The question that interests Hercule Poirot is, why?" Before I could respond, there came a discreet knock at the door. Poirot's valet, Georges, entered with his usual grave efficiency. "A lady to see you, sir," announced. "Miss Dorothy Crane. She states that her business is urgent and concerns the death of Sir Montague Fairfax." Poirot's eyes brightened with that particular gleam that indicated the game was afoot. "Indeed, then we must not keep the lady waiting. Show her in, Georges, and perhaps you would be so good as to prepare tea. I suspect this interview may prove illuminating." Miss Dorothy Crane proved to be a woman of perhaps 45, possessed of the quiet efficiency that marks the truly indispensable secretary. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, and her clothing, while of good quality, was chosen for practicality rather than fashion. She carried herself with the composed dignity of someone accustomed to managing the affairs of important men. But I noticed that her gloved hands trembled slightly as she accepted Poirot's invitation to be seated. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "I've come to you because I fear the police are not taking this matter with the seriousness it deserves. They speak of natural death, of coincidence, of the tricks that rigor mortis can play, but I knew Sir Montague Fairfax for 15 years, and I tell you that what I discovered last evening was not natural." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped before him with geometric precision. "Tell me, mademoiselle, exactly what you observed. Omit nothing, however trivial it may seem." Miss Crane drew a deep breath, composing herself with visible effort. "I arrived at Sir Montague's house at 9 o'clock precisely. I had promised to deliver some documents that required his signature before this morning's board meeting. Wickham admitted me, as usual, and I proceeded directly to the library. The door was closed, which was not unusual, as Sir Montague often worked late into the evening. And when you entered, the sight that greeted me was unnatural. Sir Montague sat in his reading chair, but not as I had ever seen him sit before. He was perfectly upright, his spine straight as a ruler, his hands placed with absolute symmetry upon the chair arms. His head was held high, his eyes open and staring directly ahead. At first glance, one might have thought he was posing for a formal portrait. But you knew immediately that he was dead. Oh, yes. There was something in the absolute stillness, the waxy quality of the skin, and the eyes. She shuddered delicately. They were open, but they saw nothing. It was most disturbing. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And the room itself? You observed nothing unusual in its arrangement?" Miss Crane hesitated, and I saw her hands tighten in her lap. There was one thing. On the side table beside Sir Montague's chair, there was a chess set. The pieces were arranged in what appeared to be the middle of a game. But Sir Montague did not play chess, Monsieur Poirot. He considered it a waste of time. I'd heard him say so on numerous occasions. "Ah," Poirot's exclamation was soft, but charged with significance. "A chess game played by a man who did not play chess. Most interesting indeed." There is something more, Miss Crane continued, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. 3 days ago, Sir Montague asked me to prepare a letter. It was addressed to you, Monsieur Poirot. He dictated it himself, and I posted it that very afternoon. The silence that followed this revelation was electric. Poirot's green eyes had taken on that peculiar intensity that I knew meant his remarkable brain was working at full capacity. And the contents of this letter, mademoiselle. Sir Montague said that he had reason to believe his life was in danger. He mentioned that certain business associates had become unreasonable in their demands. He asked if you would be available for consultation should the need arise. Poirot rose from his chair with fluid grace, moving to the window where he stood for a moment in contemplation, his hands clasped behind his back. Miss Crane, he said finally, turning back to face us, I regret to inform you that no such letter has reached me, which suggests that someone took considerable trouble to ensure that Sir Montague's request for assistance never arrived at its destination. The implications of this statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Miss Crane's face had gone quite pale. Then you believe? I believe, mademoiselle, that Sir Montague Fairfax was murdered by someone who possessed not only the means and opportunity, but also the foresight to prevent him from seeking help. Someone who then took elaborate care to arrange his body in a manner that would suggest natural death to a casual observer. Poirot returned to his chair, his expression grave but determined. The question that now presents itself is this. Why would a murderer take such pains to create this particular tableau? What message was intended by positioning Sir Montague in that rigid, upright posture? And why introduce a chess game into the scene when the victim did not play chess? He looked directly at Miss Crane, his gaze penetrating but kind. I fear, mademoiselle, that this case will prove to be far more complex than the police suspect, but I give you my word, Hercule Poirot will discover the truth behind the affair of the corpse who sat upright. Justice, like a well-tailored suit, must be fitted precisely to the crime. As Miss Crane departed with expressions of gratitude and relief, I turned to my friend with barely contained excitement. By Jove, Poirot, this promises to be a most intriguing case. Indeed, Hastings, a dead banker who sits like a statue, a chess game played by ghostly hands, and a letter that vanished into thin air. Someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to create this mystery. The question is, are we meant to solve it, or are we meant to be deceived by it? He reached for his hat and gloves with characteristic precision. Come, mon ami, it is time to pay a visit to Eaton Square. The corpse who would not lie down has much to tell us, if we know how to listen. And with that pronouncement, we set forth into the fog-shrouded streets of London, embarking upon what would prove to be one of the most psychologically complex cases of Hercule Poirot's distinguished career. The house in Eaton Square presented itself like a fortress of respectability, its cream-stone facade and black iron railings speaking of old money and older secrets. Inspector Bradshaw met us in the marble-floored entrance hall, his ruddy face bearing the expression of a man who had encountered something beyond his considerable experience. Monsieur Poirot, he said with grudging respect, I confess I'm glad to see you. This business has me puzzled. Natural death, the doctor says, but there are irregularities I cannot account for. We were conducted to the library, a room that breathed wealth and learning in equal measure. Dark wood paneling rose to meet shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, while a dying fire cast flickering shadows across Persian carpets. The great wing chair where Sir Montague had met his end stood empty now, but its presence dominated the room like a throne awaiting its occupant. Poirot moved with his characteristic precision, examining every surface with the intensity of a scholar reading ancient texts. He studied the chair from multiple angles, his nose twitching as he detected some subtle scent that escaped my duller senses. Inspector, the door was locked when Miss Crane arrived. From the inside, yes. She had to summon Wickham to unlock it, which rather rules out an intruder, wouldn't you say? On the contrary, Poirot murmured, it raises most fascinating questions. His attention had shifted to the small table beside the chair, where a chess set commanded attention. The pieces were arranged in what appeared to be the final stages of a game. Black's king stood isolated in a corner, White's queen and knight closing in for what seemed an inevitable checkmate. Curious, Poirot observed, bending closer. A game requiring considerable skill, yet Sir Montague did not play chess. Someone has taken great care to create this particular position. It speaks not of a casual game, but of a deliberate message. Bradshaw shifted uncomfortably. The butler swears it wasn't there earlier in the evening. Poirot straightened, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar light that indicated his little grey cells were working at full capacity. He moved to the mantelpiece, where a cigar lay abandoned in a crystal ashtray, burned down to ash, but with its band still intact. A Bolivar Royal Corona, he noted, lifting the band delicately. Expensive taste, but observe, Inspector. The indentations in the tobacco show this was held by someone left-handed, while Sir Montague's secretary assures me he was right-handed. Someone else smoked this cigar, someone who sat in this very room, playing chess and waiting. Waiting for what? For the proper moment to arrange their tableau, mon ami. The rigid posture, the symmetrical positioning. Death does not create such perfect order. Someone with an artistic eye has staged this scene with meticulous care. Before Bradshaw could respond, Wickham appeared in the doorway, his usual composure badly shaken. Inspector, the family is assembled in the drawing-room as requested. We found ourselves in a vast space of pale blue silk and crystal, where 3 figures sat in carefully maintained isolation from one another. Lady Fairfax occupied a chair by the window, a handsome woman whose mourning black seemed more costume than grief. Her dry eyes assessed us with calculating intelligence. Near the fireplace stood a heavy-set man with florid complexion and expensive tailoring. Silas Thorne, Sir Montague's business partner. He gripped a whiskey glass as though it were a weapon, his hostility toward our presence barely contained. The third figure paced restlessly near the far wall, a young man whose weak chin and nervous hands marked him immediately as Julian Fairfax, the nephew. Perspiration beaded his upper lip despite the room's chill. "Gentlemen," Lady Fairfax spoke with cool precision, "I trust this investigation will be thorough. If my husband was murdered, I intend to know who did it. The state of his recent business affairs certainly provided sufficient motive." Thorne's face darkened. "Evelyn, that's hardly what, Silas? Hardly true. We both know Montague had discovered certain irregularities in the accounts. He was planning to take action." Young Julian stopped his pacing abruptly, his face paling further. "Aunt Evelyn, surely you don't suggest—" "I suggest nothing," she replied with arctic calm. "I merely state facts, facts that Monsieur Poirot will no doubt find most illuminating." Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes moving from face to face with the precision of a photographer capturing portraits. "Indeed, madame. The truth has a way of revealing itself, like oil rising to the surface of water. Tell me, who among you was the last to see Sir Montague alive?" The silence that followed was electric with unspoken accusations and carefully guarded secrets. The question hung in the air like incense in a cathedral, heavy with unspoken implications. I observed the subtle shifts in posture, the quick glances exchanged between family members, the way each person seemed to retreat into their own carefully constructed defenses. It was Silas Thorne who broke the silence, his voice carrying the forced confidence of a man accustomed to controlling conversations through sheer will. "I was the last to see Montague alive," he declared, setting his whiskey glass down with deliberate precision. "I called on him at 6:30 to discuss some pressing business matters, a potential merger with a French banking consortium. We concluded our discussion around 7:15, and I departed immediately afterward. He was in perfect health, seated in his usual manner in that chair, reading through some correspondence." Poirot's head tilted with that characteristic bird-like attention. His usual manner, you say? Describe this, if you please. Thorne frowned as though the question struck him as peculiar. Slouched, naturally. One leg crossed over the other, his head tilted to the right, one arm dangling over the chair's side, the way any comfortable man sits when reading. Certainly not sitting at attention like a soldier on parade. Most illuminating, Poirot murmured, his gaze shifting to the nervous young man who had resumed his agitated pacing. And you, Monsieur Julien? When did you last see your uncle? The young man's face underwent a remarkable transformation, cycling through several shades of pallor before settling on a sickly grey. His hands trembled as he reached for his collar, loosening it as though it had suddenly become too tight. That is to say. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. I did call on Uncle Montague yesterday evening, around 7 o'clock. I'd hoped to speak with him privately about certain financial difficulties I've encountered. Lady Fairfax's voice cut through the air like a blade. Financial difficulties. What a delicate way to describe gambling debts that would bankrupt a duke. Julian's face flushed crimson. It was a temporary setback. Uncle Montague had agreed to help, but he was disappointed in my judgment. Our conversation was brief and rather heated. I left shortly after 7:30, perhaps closer to 7:45. And his condition when you departed? Poirot inquired gently. Alive and well, I assure you. Angry, certainly, but in good health. He was still in his chair, much as Mr. Thorne described. Relaxed, though clearly irritated with me. Lady Fairfax rose from her chair with fluid grace, moving to the window where she stood silhouetted against the grey London afternoon. I saw my husband earlier that evening around 6:15. We had what one might charitably call a discussion about household expenses. Montague had developed some rather austere ideas about our standard of living. The conversation was unpleasant. Yet you did not see him later in the evening. I was at the opera, Tosca at Covent Garden. Mrs. Adelaide Pemberton accompanied me, and we took supper afterward at the Savoy. I returned home well past midnight to find the house in chaos and my husband dead. Inspector Bradshaw cleared his throat. If I may, Monsieur Poirot, we should hear from Wickham. His testimony is most relevant to the mystery of the body's position. The butler was summoned, and he entered with the grave dignity of a man who had served the family faithfully for decades. His usual composure was clearly strained, but his voice remained steady as he delivered his account. I can confirm the testimonies given, sir. Mr. Thorne departed at approximately 7:20. Master Julian left shortly before 8 o'clock. After that time, I locked the front door and retired to the servants' hall for our evening meal. No one entered or left the house until Miss Crane's arrival at 9 o'clock. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And Sir Montague's position when you last saw him? That is what disturbs me most, sir. When I showed Mr. Thorne out at 7:20, I glanced into the library. Sir Montague was in his customary reading posture, slouched in his chair, head tilted, quite relaxed. When Miss Crane discovered him at 9 o'clock, he was sitting bolt upright, hands placed symmetrically on the armrests, spine straight as a ruler. In 30 years of service, I've never seen Sir Montague sit in such a formal manner. The implications of this testimony settled over the room like a shroud. Someone had entered that locked library between 7:30 and 9 o'clock. Someone who had not only murdered Sir Montague, but had taken extraordinary care to arrange his body in a specific, unnatural position. Poirot rose and moved to the chess set, studying the pieces with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. This chess game troubles me greatly. Sir Montague did not play chess, yet here we find a game in progress, and not just any game, but one displaying considerable skill. The position suggests what chess players call a bishop's gambit, a complex opening that requires deep understanding of the game's subtleties. He turned back to face the assembled group, his green eyes moving from face to face with surgical precision. Someone brought this chess set to the library. Someone who plays chess with considerable expertise. Someone who wished to leave a message that only another chess player would understand. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Each person in the room seemed to be calculating, reassessing, preparing for revelations yet to come. We have, then, a locked room, a repositioned corpse, a mysterious chess game, and a cigar smoked by someone other than the victim. Poirot continued with methodical precision. These elements do not arrange themselves by chance. They speak of a mind that delights in puzzles, that wishes to communicate something specific to those clever enough to understand. His gaze settled on each suspect in turn. The question that now presents itself is this: which among you possesses both the knowledge of chess required to create this tableau and the psychological sophistication to conceive such an elaborate charade? For make no mistake, this was no crime of passion, no sudden act of violence. This was murder most carefully planned and executed with the precision of a master craftsman. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed the quarter hour, its sound echoing through the room like a countdown to justice. Somewhere among these carefully composed faces lay the truth, waiting for Hercule Poirot's little grey cells to tease it into the light. The afternoon light filtering through the library's tall windows had begun to take on that peculiar quality of late autumn, thin, grey, and somehow accusatory. Poirot requested that Inspector Bradshaw arrange private interviews with each family member, a methodical approach that would allow him to observe the subtle contradictions and nervous habits that group interrogation often concealed. We established ourselves in Sir Montague's study, a smaller room that reflected its owner's austere character. The massive mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface bearing only the essential implements of business: an inkwell, a blotter, and a single leather-bound ledger. Poirot settled himself behind this fortress of respectability with the air of a judge preparing to hear confession. Lady Fairfax entered first, her composure intact, but her eyes holding that particular wariness of someone who has spent years perfecting the art of concealment. She arranged herself in the chair across from Poirot with practiced grace, her hands folded precisely in her lap. "Madame," Poirot began, his tone respectful yet penetrating, "your marriage to Sir Montague, it was harmonious." A thin smile played across her lips, devoid of warmth. "Monsieur Poirot, I am 43 years old and have been married for 22 years. Harmony is a luxury reserved for newlyweds and romantics. Montague and I had reached an understanding. He managed his financial empire, and I maintained our social position. It was a partnership of mutual benefit. Yet you quarreled recently about household expenses." Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. Montague had developed peculiar ideas about economy. He spoke of reducing staff, closing the country house, curtailing my allowance. For a man of his considerable wealth, it was most unusual behavior. I suspected he was either preparing for some significant business venture or— She paused, choosing her words with surgical precision. Or he was redistributing his wealth in ways that would not include his current wife. You believed he intended divorce? I believed he was considering his options. A man does not suddenly become miserly without reason. Silas Thorne proved a more aggressive subject, entering the study like a man prepared for battle. His florid face bore the expression of someone who had spent the morning rehearsing justifications. "I'll save you time, Poirot," he declared, positioning himself defiantly before the desk. Yes, there were irregularities in our accounts, minor discrepancies involving investments made for clients who valued discretion. Nothing illegal, but potentially embarrassing if scrutinized by someone lacking understanding of private banking's requirements. "And Sir Montague threatened to dissolve your partnership?" He had become unreasonably rigid about transparency. Without the Fairfax Association, I would be ruined. Merely another banker with questionable judgment and insufficient capital. But I left him alive at 7:20, and I have witnesses placing me at my club from 8 o'clock onward. Young Julian's interview proved most illuminating. He entered like a man approaching execution, his pale face beaded with perspiration despite the room's chill. "Monsieur Julien," Poirot began gently, "you play chess, do you not?" The young man's head snapped up in surprise. "Chess? Yes, rather well, actually. It's one of my few competencies, but what relevance? The chess set in your uncle's library. You recognize the position?" Julian's anxiety momentarily gave way to intellectual curiosity. From what I glimpsed, it appeared to be a variation of the bishop's gambit. Quite sophisticated, but Uncle Montague considered chess frivolous. Yet someone arranged those pieces with considerable expertise. The implication hung between them. Julian's face cycled through indignation before settling on desperate honesty. "My gambling debts were catastrophic, £20,000. Uncle Montague agreed to help, but demanded I sign over my inheritance, place myself under his financial guardianship. We argued bitterly. When I left at 7:45, he was alive but furious." Poirot leaned forward with sudden intensity. "In your observation that evening, did you notice anything unusual?" Julian frowned, concentrating. "There was a distinctive smell when I entered. Sweet, rather like almonds. It seemed to come from his teacup. Uncle Montague was particular about his evening Earl Grey, always at precisely 7 o'clock. After Julian departed, Poirot summoned the housemaid, a timid girl named Alice who twisted her apron nervously. "The chess set?" Poirot inquired gently. "Have you seen it before?" "Oh, yes, sir. It belongs to Master Julian. He keeps it in his room, studies it for hours. I've heard him talking about strategies and sacrifices. Says life is like chess. You must sacrifice pawns to save the king." Alice also revealed that the book found in Sir Montague's lap, The Psychology of Power, belonged to Mr. Thorne, who had left it in the study the previous week. As the interviews concluded, Poirot sat in profound contemplation, his fingers steepled before him. "You see, Hastings, we have a chess player who speaks of sacrifice, a business partner whose book appears in the victim's lap, a wife whose marriage was dissolving, and the sweet scent of almonds suggesting digitalis poisoning. Someone has orchestrated this death with the precision of a master chess player, but even masters make moves that reveal their strategy. The pieces were falling into place, but the final gambit remained hidden in shadow. The morning brought with it the crisp efficiency of official confirmation, delivered in the form of Dr. Pembroke Ashford's post-mortem report. Inspector Bradshaw arrived at the Eaton Square residence bearing documents that would transform speculation into certainty, though they would raise as many questions as they answered. "Digitalis glycoside," Dr. Ashford announced, consulting his notes with the precision of a man accustomed to speaking for the dead. "Sufficient quantity to cause cardiac arrest within 30 to 40 minutes of ingestion. The concentration in the stomach contents suggests it was administered in liquid form, most likely the evening tea, which would mask the slightly bitter taste." Poirot nodded with satisfaction, his theory confirmed. The sweet almond scent that young Julian detected. Digitalis from the foxglove, a poison that requires both botanical knowledge and careful calculation. Too little, and the victim merely becomes ill. Too much, and the death appears obviously unnatural. We returned to the library, that silent theatre where the drama had unfolded. In the clear light of morning, with the fire cold and the shadows banished, the room seemed to yield its secrets more readily. Poirot moved with his characteristic precision, examining surfaces that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, kneeling beside the great wing chair where Sir Montague had died. "The positioning of this chair, it has been moved. See the indentations in the carpet? The chair originally sat 3 inches further from the fireplace. Someone repositioned it after death to create the perfect tableau." Inspector Bradshaw frowned. "But the room was locked from the inside. We've established that beyond doubt." "Ah, but have we?" Poirot moved to the door, his keen eyes examining the lock mechanism. Observe this faint trace of wax near the keyhole, barely visible unless one knows what to seek. Someone has manipulated this lock from the outside using an old but effective technique. A piece of string attached to the key, a small amount of wax to hold it in position. The door could be locked from within while the perpetrator escaped through other means. He moved to the tall windows, testing the latches with delicate fingers. The center window, though appearing secure, showed minute scratches around the lock mechanism. Voila, our exit route. This window can be opened from outside with a thin blade, a technique requiring patience and skill, but entirely feasible for someone with proper preparation. The chess set continued to fascinate him. He studied the positioning of each piece with the intensity of a master player analyzing a crucial game. This is no random arrangement, mes amis. The white pieces control the center of the board, pressing toward an inevitable checkmate. But observe, the white pieces show signs of recent handling, while the black pieces bear a fine layer of dust. Someone played both sides, but focused their attention on white's aggressive strategy. The killer sees himself as white, I suggested. The aggressor, the one in control. Précisément, and Sir Montague was cast as black, reactive, defensive, ultimately doomed. But there is something more troubling here. Poirot's expression had grown grave. This chess problem requires considerable expertise to construct. It is not the work of a casual player, but of someone who understands the game's deeper psychological elements. It was then that Wickham appeared, bearing a leather portfolio that he presented with obvious reluctance. "Monsieur Poirot, I found something in Sir Montague's private papers. A letter he wrote but never sent. I thought perhaps." The letter, dated 3 days before Sir Montague's death, was addressed to his solicitor and written in the banker's precise hand. Poirot read it aloud, his voice growing more troubled with each sentence. "My dear Graves, I write to you in a state of considerable mental distress. For the past month I've observed phenomena in my home that I cannot rationally explain. Books appear in different locations from where I placed them. Chess problems are arranged in my study, though I do not play chess. I hear footsteps in rooms I know to be empty. I begin to doubt my own perceptions, to question whether my mind is failing me. Yet I am not yet so far gone that I cannot recognize a deliberate campaign when I see one. Someone wishes me to believe I'm losing my faculties, but I cannot fathom their purpose." The implications struck us like a physical blow. This was not merely murder for gain. This was psychological warfare conducted with diabolical patience and skill. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. "We are dealing with a mind of extraordinary cunning. Someone who understood that to destroy Sir Montague completely, it was not enough simply to kill him. First, they must make him doubt his own sanity, render him vulnerable to manipulation." Inspector Bradshaw's face had gone pale. "But who among our suspects possesses such psychological sophistication?" Before Poirot could answer, we were interrupted by a commotion from the conservatory. A maid's scream echoed through the house, followed by running footsteps. We rushed toward the sound, finding Silas Thorne collapsed among the exotic plants, his face flushed and his breathing labored. Dr. Ashford, summoned with remarkable speed, confirmed our fears. Digitalis poisoning, though in a smaller dose than killed Sir Montague. He's alive, but barely. Beside Thorne's chair, placed with obvious deliberation, sat a single white chess pawn. "The game continues," Poirot observed grimly. "But now the killer has made an error. This second attack reveals desperation, and desperation leads to mistakes." As Thorne was carried away to hospital, Poirot examined the conservatory with renewed intensity. "Someone has grown overconfident, Hastings. They believe they control this game absolutely. But every chess master knows that the most dangerous moment comes when victory seems assured. That is when one becomes careless, when the fatal blunder occurs." He turned to face us, his green eyes blazing with determination. "Tonight, we shall see who among our suspects visits Mr. Thorne in hospital, for our killer cannot resist confirming their handiwork, and that compulsion will be their undoing. The pieces were moving toward their final positions, and Hercule Poirot was ready to force the endgame. The vigil at St. Bartholomew's Hospital required the patience of a chess master contemplating a complex endgame. Poirot had arranged with Inspector Bradshaw to position plainclothes officers at strategic points throughout the building, creating an invisible web that would capture any visitor to Silas Thorne's bedside. We established ourselves in a small consultation room with an unobstructed view of the private ward, settling in for what promised to be a revealing evening. The hospital's atmosphere, that peculiar mixture of antiseptic efficiency and hushed anxiety, seemed to heighten every sound, every footstep in the corridor. Thorne lay unconscious but stable, his florid complexion now waxy pale, breathing steadily under Dr. Ashford's careful monitoring. The businessman had survived the digitalis, but remained trapped in that grey twilight between consciousness and the void. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, his eyes fixed on the corridor. "How death and near death draw people like moths to flame. Those who come to this bedside tonight, they will reveal themselves in ways they never intended." Our first visitor arrived at 8:30. Lady Fairfax, moving through the hospital corridors with her characteristic composed grace. She carried a small bouquet of white chrysanthemums and remained at Thorne's bedside for exactly 15 minutes. When she emerged, her usual mask of cool control had slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been genuine distress. Poirot intercepted her with his customary courtesy. "Madame, how thoughtful of you to visit Monsieur Thorne in his time of distress." Her eyes, usually so calculating, held a tremor of something deeper. "Silas has been a valued associate of my late husband. Whatever our business disagreements, basic humanity demands some acknowledgement of his condition. Indeed. Tell me, madame, was your relationship with Monsieur Thorne purely professional?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Lady Fairfax's composure wavered, then cracked entirely. "You know, don't you? Somehow you always know. I know that grief takes many forms, and yours is not the grief of a business acquaintance." She sank into a chair in the corridor, her hands trembling as she removed her gloves. "Silas and I, we have been lovers for 2 years. Montague had grown cold, distant, obsessed with his business empire and his reputation. Silas offered warmth, understanding, companionship. We planned to leave together once he had secured his independence from the firm. But Sir Montague discovered your affair. Worse, he discovered the embezzlement. Silas had been manipulating accounts to cover my debts, gambling debts, shopping debts, the expenses of maintaining appearances. We thought we could replace the money before anyone noticed, but Montague found out 3 days before his death. He threatened to expose us both, to divorce me without settlement and ruin Silas completely. Poirot's expression remained neutral, but I could see his mind working furiously. "And so you had motive for murder, madame?" "Motive, yes. But I swear to you, I did not kill my husband. When I left for the opera that evening, Montague was alive, sitting in his chair reading, and I certainly would not poison Silas. He is the only person left who cares for me." Young Julian appeared an hour later, his nervous energy even more pronounced in the sterile hospital environment. He carried no flowers, no gifts, only his own obvious anxiety. His visit was brief, but when he emerged, his face bore the greenish pallor of genuine shock. "Uncle Silas looks dreadful," he stammered when Poirot questioned him. "Like death itself. It made me realize whoever killed Uncle Montague is still out there, still dangerous. What if they decide I know too much?" "And what is it that you might know, Monsieur Julian?" The young man's eyes widened with panic. "The chess set. I recognized the position when I saw it in the library. It's from a famous game, Morphy versus the Duke of Brunswick, 1858. The opera box game, they call it. A brilliant sacrifice that leads to inevitable checkmate. Someone with deep knowledge of chess history arranged those pieces. This revelation struck Poirot like a physical blow. You are certain of this identification? Absolutely. I've studied that game dozens of times. It's considered one of the most elegant examples of sacrificial attack in chess literature. But Uncle Montague knew nothing of chess. He considered it frivolous. Someone else created that tableau, someone who wanted to send a very specific message about sacrifice and inevitable victory. After Julian departed, Poirot sat in profound contemplation, his fingers steepled before him. The pieces begin to form a pattern, Hastings. We have financial motive, romantic motive, and now intellectual motive. Someone has orchestrated not just murder, but a complex psychological game designed to torment the survivors. Our final visitor proved the most illuminating. Miss Dorothy Crane arrived near midnight, when the hospital had settled into its quietest hours. She moved with her usual efficiency, carrying a leather portfolio that she explained contained urgent business documents Thorne had requested before his collapse. But Poirot was no longer accepting explanations at face value. "Mademoiselle, surely such business matters can wait until Monsieur Thorne recovers." Her composure, always remarkable, showed the first signs of strain. Mr. Thorne was most insistent that he needed these particular ledgers, the client accounts from the past 6 months. He said certain discrepancies required immediate attention, that Sir Montague had been conducting his own audit. The same audit that revealed the embezzlement? Yes. Sir Montague had discovered systematic manipulation of client funds, conducted over several years with considerable sophistication, but the pattern troubled him. The thefts were too clever, too psychologically complex for simple greed. Poirot examined the portfolio she carried, his eyebrows rising as he studied the ledger entries. These records show transfers to Geneva accounts, payments to consulting firms that exist only on paper. But observe the timing, Hastings. The most damaging transactions occurred after Sir Montague began his investigation. Why would the embezzler continue stealing when they knew they were under scrutiny? Unless, I suggested, they wanted to be discovered. Précisément. Or unless someone else was manipulating the evidence to implicate Monsieur Thorne. Someone who understood that the best way to destroy a man is not merely to kill him, but to ensure he dies under suspicion of crimes he did not commit. As we prepared to leave the hospital, a night nurse approached with disturbing news. "Excuse me, gentlemen, but we've had a break-in attempt in Mr. Thorne's room. Someone tried to tamper with his medication, but our security caught them before any harm was done." The would-be intruder had escaped, but they left behind a single item on Thorne's bedside table, a white chess queen positioned with deliberate precision. "The game accelerates," Poirot observed grimly, examining the piece with a magnifying glass. "Our killer grows impatient, perhaps desperate. They have revealed their hand more clearly than they intended." He turned to me, his green eyes blazing with determination. "The psychological warfare continues, but now we understand the rules. Someone has been playing chess with human lives, sacrificing pawns to protect their king. But every chess master knows that the most dangerous moment comes when victory seems assured. That is when fatal mistakes are made." As we emerged into the fog-shrouded London night, Poirot's expression held that peculiar intensity that meant his little grey cells were working at their highest capacity. "Tomorrow, Hastings, we shall force our opponent to make their final move. For I believe I now understand not just who committed these crimes, but why they arranged them as an elaborate chess problem. The solution lies not in the pieces on the board, but in the mind that moves them." The game was entering its final phase, and Hercule Poirot was ready to call checkmate. The morning found Poirot in uncharacteristic restlessness, his usual methodical calm replaced by an energy that spoke of pieces falling into place within his remarkable mind. He paced our sitting room with the focused intensity of a chess master contemplating a crucial endgame position, his green eyes bright with the peculiar satisfaction that came when complex patterns began to reveal their underlying logic. "We return to Eaton Square, Hastings," he announced abruptly, adjusting his perfectly groomed mustache with mechanical precision. "There are questions I have left strategically unanswered, observations I have allowed to remain incomplete. The time has come to force our opponent into revealing their true position." Inspector Bradshaw met us at the Fairfax residence, bearing documents that would transform our understanding of the case's financial dimensions. His expression carried the weight of discoveries that had shaken his fundamental assumptions about the investigation. "Poirot," he announced without preamble, "we've traced those Swiss accounts mentioned in the ledgers. The primary beneficiary is not Silas Thorne, as the evidence initially suggested, but Dorothy Crane. Over £300,000 transferred across multiple transactions over 7 years. The revelation struck the morning air like a thunderclap. Poirot's expression remained carefully neutral, but I observed the rapid calculations taking place behind those penetrating eyes. The reassessment of every conversation, every gesture, every carefully composed response from Sir Montague's devoted secretary. "Most illuminating," he murmured, examining the banking documents with meticulous attention. "And the pattern of these transfers, Inspector, they suggest someone with extraordinary insight into Sir Montague's business operations. Someone who could predict market movements and client transactions with uncanny accuracy." "Precisely. Someone positioned to observe every confidential discussion, every strategic decision, every moment of vulnerability." We found Miss Crane in Sir Montague's private study, conducting an inventory of his papers with her characteristic efficiency. The thorough competence that usually marked her manner seemed today overlaid with a subtle tension, as though the weight of secrets long carried had begun to affect even her remarkable composure. "Monsieur Poirot," she greeted us with her usual professional courtesy, though I noticed her hands pause momentarily in their work. "I trust your investigation progresses satisfactorily." Poirot settled himself in the chair opposite her desk, his manner courteous yet penetrating. "Mademoiselle, we have discovered certain financial irregularities that require explanation. The Swiss accounts established in your name contain substantial funds that appear to have originated from Sir Montague's business operations." To my astonishment, Miss Crane did not attempt denial or evasion. Instead, she set down her pen with deliberate precision and met Poirot's gaze with the directness of someone who had been expecting this confrontation. "I have been anticipating this conversation," she admitted, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her revelation. "Yes, those accounts exist, and yes, the funds came from Sir Montague's business, but I did not steal them, Monsieur Poirot. They were compensation, payment for services that extended far beyond secretarial duties." "Services of what nature?" Her expression hardened with something approaching defiance. Sir Montague Fairfax presented himself to the world as a paragon of financial probity. In reality, he was a master manipulator who used his clients' trust to enrich himself through schemes that skirted the boundaries of legality. I kept his secrets, managed his deceptions, ensured his reputation remained untarnished. The Swiss accounts were my insurance, my guarantee that if exposure ever came, I would not face ruin alone. The implications of this confession reverberated through the room. Here was motive of a different order, not simple greed, but the complex relationship between complicity and self-preservation that marks the most sophisticated financial crimes. "But something changed recently," Poirot observed, his tone gentle yet relentless. "Sir Montague discovered your insurance policy and threatened exposure. That is when the psychological warfare began, the chess problems, the moved objects, the systematic campaign to make him doubt his own sanity." "No," the word burst from her with surprising vehemence. "I did not conduct that campaign. Someone else was orchestrating those psychological attacks. Someone who understood the human mind with frightening precision. When I realized what was happening, I urged Sir Montague to contact you. I dictated that letter myself and ensured its immediate posting. Yet the letter never reached me, because someone intercepted it. Someone who recognized that Hercule Poirot would see through their elaborate charade immediately. Before we could pursue this revelation further, Wickham appeared in the doorway, his usual dignified composure showing signs of strain. "Excuse me, sir, but Inspector Bradshaw has requested that I provide additional testimony regarding the evening of Sir Montague's death." Poirot's attention sharpened immediately. "Indeed, Wickham, your observations that evening may prove crucial. Tell me again, when you last saw Sir Montague alive, you observed him in his customary reading posture?" The butler nodded gravely. "Yes, sir. At approximately 7:20, when I showed Mr. Thorne to the door, I glanced into the library. Sir Montague appeared to be sleeping in his chair, slumped to one side, his head tilted, quite relaxed. It was his usual position when reading late into the evening. But you did not see his face clearly." Wickham hesitated, a frown creasing his features. "The light was dim, sir. Only the reading lamp was illuminated. I saw his velvet smoking jacket, his grey hair, but he was turned away from the door. I assumed he had dozed off over his correspondence." "Ah!" Poirot's exclamation carried the weight of sudden comprehension. "But what if, Wickham, the figure you observed was not Sir Montague at all? What if someone had already positioned his body in that chair, arranged to create the illusion of a man sleeping peacefully?" The butler's face went pale. "But, sir, who could have—" "Someone with intimate knowledge of Sir Montague's habits, someone who understood exactly how he would appear to a casual observer in dim light, someone who needed to establish a specific timeline to provide themselves with an unshakable alibi." We returned to the library, where Poirot immediately began a more thorough examination of the bookshelves. His fingers moved along the volumes with the precision of a scholar seeking a specific text, until he located what he sought, a comprehensive work on advanced toxicology. Opening it revealed that several pages had been carefully removed. "Digitalis preparation," he murmured, showing us the gaps where detailed information had been excised. "The knowledge required for proper dosage, for creating a poison that would mimic natural heart failure. And observe, Hastings." He reached behind the remaining books, withdrawing a small empty vial that still carried the faint, sweet scent of almonds. "The poison container," I breathed, understanding the implications immediately. "Hidden where it would eventually be discovered, no doubt to implicate whichever suspect proved most convenient, but our killer made a crucial error. They assumed I would examine only the evidence presented, not search for what was missing." Miss Crane had followed us to the library, her professional composure now showing visible cracks. "Monsieur Poirot, you cannot seriously believe that I believe, mademoiselle, that this case involves layers of deception more complex than simple murder for gain. Someone has been conducting an elaborate chess game, using human lives as pieces, arranging sacrifices to achieve a victory that extends beyond mere financial benefit." He moved to the chess set, still positioned exactly as it had been found beside Sir Montague's body. "The Opera Box game, Morphy versus the Duke of Brunswick, 1858. A masterpiece of sacrificial attack where the queen is given up to achieve inevitable checkmate." Someone with deep knowledge of chess history arranged these pieces, someone who saw themselves as Morphy, the brilliant tactician sacrificing valuable pieces to secure ultimate victory. "But the psychological sophistication required," I protested, "the intimate knowledge of everyone's weaknesses, the ability to manipulate multiple suspects simultaneously." "Precisely, Hastings. We are dealing with a mind that delights in intellectual superiority, that finds satisfaction in controlling others through carefully orchestrated fear and doubt. Someone who has observed this household for years, learning every secret, every vulnerability, every psychological pressure point." Miss Crane's face had gone quite white. "You speak of someone who has been planning this for years, someone with access to everything, someone who—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening with what appeared to be genuine terror. "The client Sir Montague mentioned, Mrs. Helena Ashworth, She appeared 3 months ago, claiming to need discreet management of her inheritance. Sir Montague was charmed by her sophistication, her knowledge of financial matters, her apparent vulnerability. "This Mrs. Ashworth?" Poirot demanded, his voice sharp with sudden interest. "Describe her." "I met her only once, about 6 weeks ago. Dark hair, elegant bearing, perhaps 40 years old. She had a mind like a chess master," Sir Montague said, always thinking several moves ahead. "But when I attempted to verify her credentials, I discovered that no such person exists in any social register or financial database." The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Someone had created an elaborate false identity, cultivated Sir Montague's trust over months, learned his deepest secrets and vulnerabilities, and then systematically destroyed him using psychological warfare that culminated in murder, staged as an elaborate chess problem. A fictional identity, Poirot mused, designed to gain intimate access to Sir Montague's business and personal life. Someone who understood that the most effective way to destroy a man like Sir Montague was not merely to kill him, but to first undermine his confidence in his own perceptions. The clock in the library chimed the hour, its sound echoing through the room like a countdown to revelation. Somewhere in the web of deception that surrounded this case lay the truth. A truth that involved not just murder, but a psychological game of extraordinary complexity and cruelty. "We approach the endgame," Poirot announced, his voice carrying the weight of imminent resolution. "Our opponent has played brilliantly, but even the most sophisticated chess master can be forced into a position where only one move remains possible. Tonight, Hastings, we shall discover who has been conducting this deadly game, and why they believe themselves clever enough to defeat Hercule Poirot." The fog outside had begun to lift, but the shadows in the library seemed to deepen, as though the room itself were preparing for the final confrontation between hunter and hunted. The afternoon brought with it the methodical pursuit of loose threads that Poirot pursued with the tenacity of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. Our first destination was the chambers of Mr. Graves in Lincoln's Inn, where the solicitor received us in his book-lined sanctuary with the grave courtesy of a man who had spent decades managing the secrets of the wealthy. "I had expected you, Monsieur Poirot," he said, settling behind his mahogany desk with careful precision. "Sir Montague spoke of you often, particularly in his final weeks. I am grieved that his letter to you never reached its destination." Poirot leaned forward with that characteristic intensity that indicated crucial information was about to be revealed. "But you received your letter, Monsieur Graves, the one in which he described the psychological disturbances that plagued his final days?" "Indeed. Most disturbing correspondence. He wrote of books moved from their proper places, chess problems appearing in rooms where no chess was played, the sound of footsteps in empty corridors. He feared for his sanity, yet his letter demonstrated perfect rational thought. I visited him the day after receiving it. And your impression of his mental state?" Graves chose his words with legal precision. "Agitated, certainly, but entirely rational. He spoke at length about a new client, a Mrs. Helena Ashworth, whose intelligence had impressed him greatly. She raised subtle questions about his business methods, his investment strategies, the psychological pressures inherent in managing great wealth. He found her intellectually stimulating, though he admitted her influence coincided rather too precisely with the beginning of these mysterious disturbances." "You met this Mrs. Ashworth personally?" "Once, here in this very office, when she came to sign certain documents. A woman of perhaps 40 years, dark hair arranged with sophisticated precision, well dressed in the manner of someone accustomed to quality. I recall her hands particularly. Long fingers, no rings, nails cut quite short in the practical manner. She signed all documents with her left hand." Poirot's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. "A left-handed lady? And did you observe anything else of significance?" "She carried about her person the faint aroma of expensive tobacco, Bolivar cigars, if I am not mistaken. When I remarked upon it with some surprise, she merely smiled and said she had acquired the habit from a dear friend. Most unusual for a lady of her apparent refinement. The address provided led us to a dreary block of furnished rooms in Bloomsbury, where the landlady, a sharp-eyed woman with the suspicious nature of her profession, readily confirmed the tenancy of one Mrs. Helena Ashworth. "Paid 3 months in advance, cash on the table," she declared. "Never caused trouble, received few visitors, left suddenly last week without forwarding address. Foreign, perhaps. Had that careful way of speaking English some foreigners do, though her accent was barely noticeable." The rooms themselves bore the anonymous quality of temporary lodgings, yet careful examination revealed traces of their recent occupants' true nature. Upon the small table by the window sat a cheap chess set, its pieces arranged in what appeared to be a complex middle-game position. Beside it lay a well-thumbed volume titled Modern Psychological Methods of Persuasion, its margins filled with annotations in a small, precise hand. Poirot moved through the space with reverent care, his keen eyes cataloguing every detail. At the writing desk, he discovered fragments of blotting paper bearing the impressions of correspondence, and in the single drawer, an empty envelope addressed to Sir Montague Fairfax, in handwriting that showed signs of deliberate disguise. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, kneeling beside the window frame, "this fragment of red sealing wax, pressed flat as though used in some mechanical application. In Sir Montague's library, we found traces of similar wax near the door lock, evidence of the string and key technique used to lock the room from outside. Our Mrs. Ashworth practiced her method here before employing it at Eaton Square." The implications were staggering. Someone had maintained this elaborate double identity for months, perfecting not only their disguise but their technique for committing the perfect locked-room murder. The psychological sophistication required was extraordinary. Someone who understood not merely the mechanics of deception, but the subtle art of psychological manipulation. Upon our return to Eaton Square, Dr. Ashford was waiting with additional medical evidence that would prove crucial to understanding the crime's true complexity. His analysis of the digitalis, found in Sir Montague's system, revealed a level of pharmaceutical knowledge that narrowed our suspect pool considerably. "The preparation was extraordinarily pure," he reported with scientific precision. "Pharmaceutical grade, not the crude extract one might obtain from garden plants. The dosage was calculated to cause death within a specific time frame, 30 to 40 minutes after ingestion. Such precision requires professional medical knowledge or extensive study of toxicology." Young Julian arrived as we were digesting this information, his usual nervous energy elevated to a state of genuine excitement. "Monsieur Poirot, I have remembered something that may prove significant. The evening Uncle Montague died, as I approached the house, I observed a woman leaving through the conservatory. She moved quickly through the garden toward the mews, carrying what appeared to be a small case or portfolio. Can you describe this woman more precisely?" "Tall, elegant bearing, dark hair visible beneath her hat. She moved with purpose, rather than stealth, as though she belonged there. There was something familiar about her posture, her way of walking, though I cannot place exactly what." Poirot's expression had taken on that quality of intense concentration that indicated his remarkable mind was synthesizing disparate elements into a coherent pattern. "The pieces arranged themselves before us, mes amis. A fictional identity created with extraordinary care, medical knowledge combined with psychological expertise. A woman who could move freely between different social spheres, banker's study, solicitor's office, furnished lodgings, without arousing suspicion." He moved to the chess set, studying the positioned pieces with renewed understanding. But the true significance lies not in the individual deceptions, but in their orchestration. Someone has conducted a campaign of psychological warfare designed not merely to kill Sir Montague, but to destroy him completely, to reduce him from a position of power and certainty to one of confusion and doubt before delivering the final blow. Inspector Bradshaw, who had been listening with growing comprehension, voiced the question that hung in the air like incense. But who among our suspects possesses both the knowledge and the psychological sophistication to conceive such an elaborate scheme? Before Poirot could respond, Wickham appeared with a gravity that suggested momentous news. "Monsieur Poirot, there is a lady to see you. She gives her name as Mrs. Helena Ashworth and states that she has come to clarify certain misunderstandings regarding her relationship with Sir Montague Fairfax." The silence that followed was electric with anticipation. Poirot's eyes gleamed with that peculiar satisfaction that came when a carefully reasoned theory was about to be tested against reality. "Show her in, Wickham," he said quietly. "And Inspector Bradshaw, I suggest you position yourself where you can observe without being immediately visible. I believe we are about to meet the architect of this entire elaborate charade." The woman who entered moved with controlled grace, her dark hair arranged with sophisticated precision, her bearing suggesting both confidence and careful calculation. She assessed each of us with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, her composure absolute despite the circumstances that had brought her here. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice cultured and steady, "I understand you have been investigating my relationship with Sir Montague Fairfax. I've come to provide clarification, though I suspect your remarkable reputation for deduction has already revealed much of the truth." Poirot regarded her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond surface appearances into the depths of human motivation. "Indeed, madame, though I confess myself most curious to hear how you will explain your role in what I can only describe as one of the most psychologically sophisticated murders I have encountered in my career." Her smile was enigmatic, neither admission nor denial, but something far more complex. "Then perhaps, Monsieur Poirot, we should discuss the true nature of justice, and whether conventional morality applies when dealing with those who hide monstrous cruelty behind respectable facades." The final game had begun, and the true architect of this deadly chess match was ready to reveal her strategy at last. The woman who called herself Mrs. Helena Ashworth settled into the chair with the composed dignity of someone who had anticipated this confrontation and prepared for it with the precision of a chess master contemplating an inevitable endgame. Her hands, those long, elegant fingers that Graves had noticed, capable of extraordinary precision, rested quietly in her lap as she assessed each face in the room with calculating intelligence. "Before we begin this final game, madame," Poirot said with characteristic courtesy, "permit me to demonstrate what my little grey cells have already deduced. You are not Mrs. Helena Ashworth, for that person never existed outside your remarkable imagination. You are someone with deep personal reasons for destroying Sir Montague Fairfax, someone who has spent years planning not merely his death, but his complete psychological destruction." Her lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. "You flatter me with your attention to detail, Monsieur Poirot. But surely you cannot object to a woman choosing her own identity. Men have enjoyed such privileges for centuries." "Your philosophy is most interesting," Poirot replied. "But we deal here with facts. You gained Sir Montague's confidence with remarkable speed, induced him to confide his deepest fears and business secrets, and conducted a campaign of psychological warfare that would have impressed Machiavelli himself. The moved objects, the phantom footsteps, the chess problems appearing in rooms where no chess was played, all designed to make him doubt his own sanity before you delivered the final blow." "I provided intellectual companionship," she said coolly. "Sir Montague enjoyed feeling challenged. We discussed philosophy, psychology, the nature of power. He found my insights stimulating. Stimulating enough to drive him to the edge of madness," Poirot countered. "But your methods required not only psychological sophistication, but medical knowledge. The pharmaceutical-grade digitalis, the precise dosage calculated to cause death within 30 to 40 minutes. This suggests professional training." Before she could respond, the library door opened to admit Miss Dorothy Crane, her face pale but her eyes burning with intense purpose. Behind her stood Wickham, carrying a leather portfolio with obvious reluctance. "Monsieur Poirot," Miss Crane announced, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion, "I have been searching through Sir Montague's old business files, records he kept locked away for 15 years. I believe I've discovered who this woman really is." The effect on our mysterious visitor was immediate and profound. The mask of Helena Ashworth seemed to slip, revealing beneath it something far more dangerous, a depth of hatred and grief that had been forged in the fires of long injustice. 15 years ago, Miss Crane continued, her voice growing stronger, before I became Sir Montague's secretary, there was a junior partner in the firm, a brilliant young man named Arthur Penhaligon. He discovered Sir Montague's early embezzlements, his systematic manipulation of client accounts, his use of insider information for personal gain. When Arthur threatened to expose these crimes, Sir Montague destroyed him completely. She opened the portfolio with shaking hands, revealing yellowed documents and newspaper clippings. Sir Montague framed Arthur for the very crimes he had discovered, forged documents to implicate him, bribed witnesses to testify against him. Arthur was sentenced to 7 years in prison, where he died by his own hand after 18 months of disgrace and despair. The transformation in the woman before us was subtle but terrifying. The cultured composure of Helena Ashworth dissolved completely, revealing a core of steel forged in 15 years of patient planning. "Arthur Penhaligon," Poirot murmured, understanding flooding his voice. "And you, madame, are his widow, Eleanor Penhaligon, the chess player who spent 15 years moving her pieces into position, waiting for the perfect moment to achieve checkmate." She rose slowly, shedding the last pretenses of her disguise. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years of suppressed anguish and implacable determination. "He destroyed everything I loved," she said simply. "Arthur was a good man, an honorable man who believed in justice and truth. Sir Montague crushed him like an insect, all to protect his precious reputation and his stolen wealth. For 15 years, I watched that monster grow richer, more arrogant, more certain of his own invulnerability." "So you created Helena Ashworth," Poirot said quietly. "You studied psychology, learned the arts of manipulation and disguise, acquired medical knowledge sufficient to prepare pharmaceutical-grade poisons. You seduced his mind before you destroyed his body. I wanted him to experience what Arthur experienced," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The slow erosion of certainty, the growing terror, the realization that no one would believe or help him. I wanted him to doubt his own perceptions, to feel his control slipping away, to understand what it means to be utterly powerless before an implacable enemy." Her eyes moved to the chess set, still arranged in its complex endgame position. The opera box game, where the queen is sacrificed to achieve inevitable checkmate. Arthur was my sacrificed queen, and I was the player who would achieve justice through his loss. Every move was calculated, every psychological pressure precisely applied. I made Sir Montague trust me, confide in me, even as I was systematically destroying his peace of mind. "And the final evening?" Inspector Bradshaw demanded, stepping forward from his position near the window. Eleanor's smile was cold and terrible. "I arrived at 7:30, using the key he had given me as his trusted confidant. I found him exactly as I had conditioned him to sit, bolt upright in his chair, fighting the psychological pressures I had imposed, trying to maintain control through rigid posture and forced composure. The digitalis was already in his system, administered through his evening tea. I simply waited, watching as the poison took effect, as his eyes widened with the realization of who I truly was." "You told him?" In his final moments, I explained everything. I told him who I was, what he had done to Arthur, how I had spent 15 years planning his destruction. I watched the understanding dawn in his eyes, the knowledge that he had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, defeated by the very intellect he had so arrogantly dismissed. Only then did I arrange his body in that final, theatrical position, lock the door from outside using techniques I had practiced for months, and exit through the conservatory window. "And Silas Thorne?" Poirot inquired. A necessary conclusion to the game. Thorne was complicit in Arthur's destruction. He forged the documents that sent my husband to prison, perjured himself in court, helped cover up Sir Montague's crimes. The white pawn I left by his bedside was a message. Even the humblest piece can checkmate a king if played correctly. Inspector Bradshaw moved forward, his expression grim but not without sympathy. "Eleanor Penhaligon, I'm arresting you for the murder of Sir Montague Fairfax and the attempted murder of Silas Thorne." As the official caution was delivered, she looked at Poirot one final time, her expression almost serene. "The game is over, Monsieur Poirot. I may have lost my freedom, but I achieved my victory. Justice has been served, even if the law cannot recognize it as such." Poirot bowed his head slowly, a gesture that conveyed respect not for her crimes, but for the terrible brilliance of her mind and the profound injustice that had created her. "Indeed, madame. But in chess, as in life, victory achieved through such sacrifice often proves Pyrrhic. You have destroyed your enemy, but in doing so, you have destroyed yourself as well." As Eleanor Penhaligon was led away, her head held high with the dignity of someone who had achieved her life's purpose, the library seemed to exhale with collective relief. The mystery of the corpse who sat upright had been solved. The psychological puzzle unraveled, the final move played. But the tragedy of it, the wasted brilliance, the years of consumed hatred, the cycle of destruction that had claimed both victim and avenger, hung heavy in the air like incense in a cathedral, a reminder that the most dangerous mysteries are those created by the human heart's capacity for both love and vengeance. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said quietly, adjusting his coat with mechanical precision. "We have witnessed the conclusion of a game that began 15 years ago with an act of monstrous injustice. Eleanor Penhaligon achieved her checkmate, but at a cost that renders victory indistinguishable from defeat. In the end, the only winner in this deadly game was death itself." The fog outside had begun to lift, but the shadows in the Fairfax library would linger long after we had departed, testament to a brilliant mind's capacity for both justice and destruction. The days following Eleanor Penhaligon's arrest brought with them the methodical unraveling of 15 years of carefully constructed deception. Inspector Bradshaw worked tirelessly to separate truth from fabrication, while the newspapers, mercifully restrained by official intervention, reported only that Sir Montague Fairfax had died of heart failure and that certain business irregularities were under investigation. It was during Eleanor's final interview before trial that she provided Poirot with the most devastating revelation of all. Seated in the stark confines of Holloway Prison, she spoke with the same composed intelligence that had characterized Helena Ashworth, though now stripped of all pretense. "There is one detail I withheld, Monsieur Poirot. Not from shame, but because the pain of it has never diminished. When Arthur died in prison, I was carrying our child. Our daughter lived only 3 months after her birth, succumbing to pneumonia in the wretched lodgings that were all I could afford after Sir Montague's destruction of our lives. I named her Helena, after my mother." The weight of this revelation settled over the interview room like a shroud. "The woman you knew as Helena Ashworth," she continued, "was named for my daughter, a ghost given flesh to avenge 2 innocent deaths. Every psychological pressure I applied to Sir Montague was calculated payment not merely for Arthur's suffering, but for a child who never had the chance to live." Poirot received this confession with that grave courtesy he reserved for profound tragedy. "You studied psychology systematically to achieve this vengeance?" 10 years of preparation. University degrees under assumed names, the systematic study of Sir Montague's vulnerabilities, the creation of Helena Ashworth's complete identity. I learned that the most effective way to destroy a man like Sir Montague was not merely to kill him, but to first undermine his certainty, his control, his very sense of reality. The aftermath for the surviving members of the Fairfax circle proved varied in its consequences. Lady Fairfax, faced with the collapse of her husband's financial empire, discovered unexpected resilience. The embezzlements and secret accounts left the estate in precarious condition, forcing her to abandon the lavish lifestyle she had cultivated. Yet she adapted with pragmatic grace, remarking to Poirot, "Montague built a palace on quicksand. Perhaps it is time I learned to stand on solid ground." Young Julian, his gambling debts settled under strict conditions imposed by the estate's administrators, secured a modest position in a provincial bank far from London's temptations. His nervous energy gradually gave way to quieter determination. "It is a relief," he confided, "to move pieces on a ledger rather than on a chessboard devised by others." Silas Thorne survived his poisoning but emerged a diminished figure. His cooperation in exposing Sir Montague's earlier crimes earned him consideration from the Crown, though his own embezzlements could not be entirely overlooked. He resigned from the firm, surrendered his partnership, and disappeared into the obscurity that awaits disgraced financiers. Dorothy Crane faced her own reckoning with characteristic dignity. The Swiss accounts in her name were seized to compensate defrauded clients, but Inspector Bradshaw, recognizing her complex role as both conspirator and victim, elected not to prosecute. She left London quietly, securing employment with a Manchester legal firm where her formidable skills could serve truth rather than conceal it. As the legal proceedings ground toward their inevitable conclusion, Poirot found himself increasingly troubled by the case's moral complexities. During one of our quiet evenings, he sat contemplating the chess set he had requested from the Fairfax library, its pieces still arranged in their eternal endgame. "You see, Hastings," he mused, "the true tragedy of this affair lies not in Eleanor's crimes, but in the waste of extraordinary human potential. She possessed a mind of remarkable capability, intelligence, creativity, psychological insight that could have benefited mankind. Instead, 15 years of hatred transformed these gifts into instruments of destruction." He reached out and gently toppled the White King. Eleanor Penhaligon achieved her checkmate, but at what cost? She destroyed not only Sir Montague, but herself. In seeking justice through vengeance, she became the very thing she despised, a manipulator who viewed human beings as pieces to be sacrificed for victory. The fog outside our windows began to lift as evening approached, and with it seemed to dissipate some of the shadows that had haunted this extraordinary case. Poirot closed the chess set with characteristic precision, his movements carrying the finality of a master filing away a completed puzzle. "Come, mon ami," he said, rising with renewed purpose. "We have witnessed the conclusion of a game that began with injustice and ended in tragedy. But life, it is obstinate. It insists on continuing even where sorrow has passed. Another mystery awaits, another challenge for the little grey cells. We must be ready to serve truth, not vengeance, and to remember always that brilliance without compassion leads inevitably to destruction." As we prepared for whatever puzzle might next present itself, the lesson of the corpse who sat upright remained clear. In the deadly game of human passions, the only true victory lies in choosing justice over revenge, understanding over hatred, and the preservation of life over its destruction.